90% of the world's electric vehicle sales have come from the US, China and Europe. That means that the countries that are responsible for about a third of the global sales of cars or autos have passed what is called a tipping point. So we're going to look at the electric vehicles being the next smartphone, in the sense that it was a novel idea to see one and rare, where 10 years later it became rare not to have a smartphone. So that's the parallel we're going to look at, and that will move us through to the ASX leaders that we see on the market today. So we've seen a massive demand in the last couple of years for lithium miners on the ASX, and they've fallen back. Can they rise again? That's a question that we're going to look at, in the sense that Amazon, Microsoft and other tech leaders of today survived the tech wreck of 20 years ago. Now we have a look at the chart on screen on the right hand side. This one has come from Bloomberg, so we thank them for creating it. It's showing that US, Europe and China, being those three largest car makers, are now at the 5% tipping point. So they're on this chart if they've already reached that 5% tipping point. The green line is a 12-month average of all the countries that have surpassed the 5%. Norway's well and truly out there, way up towards 90%. Now this is where we can get some opinion in, and you can comment below on how you think this is very different or quite similar. The US is following that trend and they're looking to be fully electric 2025, which the chart's showing. But Norway can be different, because when electric vehicles first came to the market, they had significant tax incentives to own an electric vehicle rather than having a diesel or internal combustion engine. That's one point. The other one is that cars live much longer than a smartphone. Most people will replace their smartphone every 1 to 3 years. A car can last much longer than that, and being on the road can many more years if you look after it. Then there's a third point, which is that their cost is prohibitive. So if you think this means that electric vehicles cannot have an uptake as fast as a smartphone, let us know below. Or if you think that electric vehicles will follow the same pattern, because we have seen other industries that have done the same thing as this chart up here. We saw it with electricity, television, mobile phones in general, as well as smartphones, and then also the internet and LED light bulbs. They all reached the S-curve. Norway didn't quite show that, but imagine the S-curve starting off lower, which is the early 5%, then coming into mass adoption, coming up steeper, and then tapering off from the 95 to 100%, those who are the last to take it up. Now we have a look at the table for the US joining the list of big EV adopters. We can see the percentage taken up by Austria. Seeing Austria's at 14.8%, Belgium's 11%, China's 16.7%. Come back to that in a second. Working all the way down, New Zealand, Kiwis are doing well at 6.2%, Norway 83.5%, and then the US has just come in quarter four of 2021, 5.3%. So they're now in that 5% threshold area. Now, if you add in hybrids, plug-in electric vehicles, and look at these numbers, they get quite murky and distorted and quite complicated, because the US and China mostly skipped this stage, jumping over hybrids and plug-in electric vehicles. We move into the next chart where we do see the manufacturers. Now we've got Volkswagen, Ford and BMW. They're each targeting 50% or more of their global sales to be fully electric by the end of the decade. What you will note is the emission of both Tesla and Toyota. Two reasons here. Tesla is already beyond 5%, so this is 10% I should say, so this is years after reaching 10% of electric vehicle sales. Toyota's not there in Europe, so that's why they're not on here, and Tesla's not there because they're 100% electric vehicles. Nonetheless, we can see this movement progression. Once they get over 10%, that's that S-curve we're talking about, really slow drawing down the bottom, and then once we start to get an uptake, which we're seeing here, and then it will peter off possibly at the 90-95%. The speed at which that S-curve goes up is the part that we're debating and not quite sure about at the moment, but it could be paralleled to like the mobile phones and other ones that we've already looked at or discussed. Now we move to the ASX top 6, because if we have a look at some of the leaders on the ASX, we'll start off with SYA, which is coming at number 6 this week. For the monthly performance of 6.9%, sounds quite paltry compared to what we saw in the former movements of SYA. So the early part of 2022, massive rally, 12 cents to 36 cents, and then we had other rallies earlier in their cycle. So that's the strong movement of lithium that we've come used to in the ASX, or that Australia, as being good demand for lithium miners. Now SYA has fallen off with the rest of the market, but what we're looking at here is the companies that will trawl out a bottom and become the leaders of tomorrow. So think of Amazon. They fell about 96% from their peaks to their troughs over the tech wreck of about 3 years, and today they're quite possibly the best and strongest company in the world. So whether lithium can repeat that cycle or copy that cycle 20 years later is what we're looking at. Second place is BOA. So BOA is 8.9%. We're seeing the same sort of thing. We're going to see it drop off and then bounce off the bottom. A lower market capitalized company, but the point is that these small and mid-cap lithium miners are rallying. Morella Corporation, 10.5. Now, we've got some recent listings. We've seen some spin-offs. We've seen companies, new industrialized type companies come in as the second tier. And that becomes the next extension. What we saw throughout the tech wreck was the companies with eyeballs ran the best and ran the hardest, but they got hit the hardest and a lot of them didn't recover. Those that actually had revenue were sort of poo-pooed and shoot off the market and really out of the hype because they weren't focusing on sales without profit or just eyeballs by themselves. So they weren't actually showing the massive growth metrics that the market became used to. They ended up becoming the better companies that we see 20 years later. So that may be the sense in one that we're going to have a look at in a second. But first we have a look at Tempest Minerals to see that explosive rally pullback and then doing same sort of, still showing huge amount of investor interest, which is great to see that this could be the next phase for the lithium. But what we're going to see is lithium energy, LIS energy. So LIS, what we're going to bring on chart here, this is one of those second order companies that does work in the space, but they're not pulling it out of the ground. So it is an IPO, came in reasonable time, but has tanked since, just consistently fallen as they trawl out a bottom. So if we look at William O'Neill looking at new industries, and Mark Minervini's done similar things. As we see these markets change, so we had the miners leading, and then this was not a miner and didn't do as well. It's still part of the battery minerals, battery mining, battery production, electric vehicle space that we've looked at. These can be great beneficiaries of that electric vehicle transition and can be a next market leader throughout the cycle, and they could leave the likes of SYA behind, having an industrialized company exposed to the battery, something that Australia doesn't have too many on, because if we look at the ACDC ETF, most of those constituents are internationally based. This could be one that fits in that space. It's a part of that supply chain. Finally, we move up to the best performer, LPM, 31% gain over the month. We zoom in to have a look at LPM on the charts and we'll see that flick up. So we're seeing these spin-offs and those likes of companies that are recent listings, but has come down and rallied from the lows. That is a good strong rally. And this does leave us to that question as to whether the lithium rally can continue. You can comment below to let us know your thoughts on how strong this theme is, the thematic, the adoption of electric vehicles, and also the industrial type companies that do support the manufacturing and the supply chain of battery minerals. Also, if you'd like to know more about how to trade explosive movements like we saw with SYA, you can click on the right there to have a look at how to trade high and tight flags, that kind of pattern that we saw once here, twice, and then 3 times, and then the 4th time it did fail to understand high and tight flags. And then you can also click on the right to have a look at the playlist of technical trading where we filter ASX companies consistently.